Police officers of Reddit, have you ever had an all units call? And if so, what happened? I was doing a ride-along in college in a fairly small city in Georgia when we got an all-available units call. The address came in, the lights and siren went on, and we were hauling butt at about 120 miles per hour across town. I had no idea where we were headed until we got there. The only thing the officer said to me was, "No matter what happens, stay in the frickin' car. If you see anyone with a gun, call it on the radio like this," and showed me how. "If any of us get shot, call it in and stay in the car." Then he took a deep breath, calmly got out of the car and took a sprint towards a 40-person melee in front of the only strip club in town. We were the first car there. Over the course of the next 30 seconds, officers arrived and kept coming until they outnumbered the people fighting. The officer I was riding with was completely on his own for a 10-second eternity, and was able to rip about 10 people apart from fighting before backup arrived. It was the single bravest and most humbling thing I've ever seen with my own eyes. When it was all over, he got back in the car with 3 drunk and beaten up dudes in the back, turned to me and said, "So, when you gonna sign up?" Story 2. Former military police here. Air Force Security Forces to be specific. I was patrolling base housing doing some LE training. I'd been on station less than a year, and we heard a gunshot. We called it in immediately, and started heading in the direction we heard it from. Those houses were duplexes, and the neighbors called it in as well. BDOC, dispatch, sent us, another police unit, and then the entire external response force. This was on a nuke base, so even things that don't actually have any impact on the nuclear mission totally have an impact on the nuclear mission. We had 19 total people on scene within about 3 minutes. As the first ones on scene, my post leader and I were already at the door when the rest of them showed up. I was thankful for them showing up when they did, because we were about to breach the door and go in, just the 2 of us. We were told to hold for 30 seconds while the RF team got set up. Now we had a full stack and breaching equipment. I made a fist and thumped my helmet, signaling the breacher, who came up with his Halligan tool. My leader was number 2 in the stack, so she had to throw the flashbang. One of the RF guys passed it up from somewhere in the back of the stack, and as soon as the breacher had the door open, she tossed it in. All it did was scare the crap out of the dog. Only the husband was home, as his wife was deployed. He was sitting in the dining room on a chair with an SKS in his lap. I was maybe a pound or so of pressure away from pulling the trigger on my rifle, when I realized this dude's head was not fully intact. The SKS was only in his lap because the sling got caught on his arm after he pulled the trigger. As we cleared out the rest of the house per procedure, I had my non-firing hand basically stuffed in my mouth to stop me from puking. The dude's wife had sent him pictures and videos of her cheating on him multiple times, telling him she wanted a divorce. He thought there was no other way out, so he shot himself. The only good news from that day is that we actually had picture and video evidence to use to charge her with adultery. OSI, like an Air Force version of the FBI, pulled her out of her deployment and got her back on station, and we charged her with everything we could, including Articles 92, 107, 125, which cover sodomy, and 134. She was stripped of all rank, forfeited pay, went to confinement, and was dishonorably discharged after her 11 years of service. Edit. The neighbors adopted the dog. He was a good boy and nobody wanted to see him go to the pound. What an absurdly disgusting and hurtful way to tell someone you want a divorce. If things aren't working out in your marriage, sure, whatever, it happens all the time, right? You do not need to dismantle a man like that. I'm glad they charged her with everything they could, because that is disgusting behavior in my opinion. Story 3. 25 years ago, smallish rural town. My dad is a beat cop on patrol. My cat brings in a live mouse and is playing with it in the kitchen, and my mom is deathly afraid of rodents. So she calls dispatch and tells them my dad needs to come home. Dispatch gets on the line and tells my dad to switch to a secured line. There's an emergency at home. My dad's driving home to take care of the issue when all of the cops, probably like 4 of my small town, on patrol come in with sirens and lights blazing on my house because they all heard there was an emergency. My mother was mortified. Okay, look, scared of rodents, sure, whatever. Calling dispatch? That's a bit much. Story 4. Was a military police officer on a rather large base. I was getting off shift and being transported back to my barracks by the guys coming on shift so I could check in my weapon. Suddenly we got a call for an all units, responding to a section of base housing. A military wife was having an affair with another soldier while her husband was on deployment. Supposedly the husband was due to return soon, so she tried to break it off with the other guy and he responded by stabbing her several times. My team leader and I searched the tree line with our weapons drawn because he's armed and it's dark outside, you know. I actually passed the guy with my team leader a few yards behind me and suddenly he comes out saying, "You're looking for me!" Scared the crap out of me. My team leader covered him while I went in for the handcuffing, making sure that I had my knee firmly planted in between his shoulder blades and thoroughly covering his upper torso into the muddy terrain. Not sure what happened after that. He was taken to a holding cell by another squad and I got to go home. Ended up getting transferred from that base a few months later, but I know the wife survived the wounds. Story 5. I got run over by someone fleeing the scene of an incident that they weren't involved in. He just got scared and apparently had a gun on him. I was out of my car talking to the person who called, and my partner was trying to stop the person who was really called on, so he didn't even see me get hit. No one knew I got hit or where I was because my radio went flying. Luckily, there were a lot of witnesses who called 911 and found my radio. I confused the dispatcher because I was in so much shock that I came over the radio talking like I normally do, but I was bleeding badly from my head and broke my leg. I didn't feel the pain for about 2 hours, so I had that call come out because of me. I'm pretty sure I also got a policy made. Story 6. Not an officer, but I'll share one of my buddies. He was an older gent who has passed on now. But if Reddit had been a thing when he was younger, this would have been a top TIFU. When he was still new, he worked in a larger city. They had just gotten these shoulder mics. You know, the ones every cop now has mounted up by their mouths so they can call in easier. When new to them, they wore the cord in front of their shirts, always in the damn way, and great handles when people wanted to wrestle. Jimmy was called one night to a bar brawl. He strolled into the bedlam almost over. He was a rookie, always getting the crap details, so he was becoming famous among his department for ruining his uniforms, to the point he was having to come out of pocket to replace them. He walked into a vet telling him to cuff everyone still here, and they'll sort them out later. Jimmy grabs the closest guy, they struggle a little and go to the ground, and as they do, rip! Jimmy splits his pants clean up the backside. Knowing he's going to be the butt of jokes anyway, he turns his head to announce to the other officers, "Well, that's another uniform down," and keys his mic. Base hears uniform down, and so does everyone else in the county. The radio explodes with chatter, but the 3 cops at the bar already have their hands full, so they turn down their radios. Base decided to roll everything with lights to the scene. Jimmy said they were glad for the help when the first few cars rolled up, but they just kept coming. He was known as Jack the Radio Ripper till he transferred. Minor reprimand and he still had to pay for the pants. Story 7. Former Royal Canadian Mounted Police here, from a small tourist town, was working on a regular midweek day shift when we received a dispatch call for a bomb threat. It was in the industrial/commercial sector of town. We all went there, called in the bomb squad, the dogs, got people out of the area, so on. We were doing roadside when we got another call that the local bank's silent alarm was turned on. Now, we're in Canada, in a tourist town, things are usually relatively calm. But this was absolutely chaotic. We got the all units call, they call our neighboring detachment to help, we all split and head to the bank. We arrive, around 20-some patrol cars all around, there to see all the bank employees bound and gagged, smoke everywhere from smoke bombs. We realize very quickly the bomb threat was the diversion. We immediately got to be on the lookout to get the 3 males identified by the bank staff, including a former bank employee. We get the bolo out to CPIC, got words to airports and border crossings. We managed to catch 2 out of 3 of the guys. The last one flew back to his home country, was in Canada on a student visa. We remained on high alert for days after this looking for the 3rd guy. Canadian authorities worked with their colleagues from the other guy's country to get him extradited almost a year later. In the end, as I recall, about $130,000 were missing and never recovered. For most of us, it was the first time we had a bomb threat and or a robbery. The first time we were guarding an area expecting to be shot at from an unknown location. The robbers were reported to have AK-47 type looking weapons. Story 8. Years ago, a friend of mine was a dispatcher for the county. He covered sheriff, EMS, and fire communications, and also worked with communicating with other agencies as well. From the state troopers, he got some sort of text communication. Not a phone text, this was before that kind of thing, and it referred to an accident with injuries at the intersection of I-40 and Business 85. Something along the lines of, collision, I-40, bus 85, injuries involved. The way it was abbreviated and written made him misread it. Instead of an accident at 85 Business, he thought there was a bus collision on I-40 with 85 people injured. He dispatched every damn fire truck and ambulance the county had. They show up and it's a 2-car wreck with minor injuries. Edit. Wasn't actually I-40, but I can't remember which highway it was. Somewhere in Davidson. I know the bus 85 part is right though. I had to read that line like 5 times to make sure I was reading it correctly because I'm like, that makes it sound like there's 85 injuries. And then I read a little further and I'm like, oh, that's the point. Surely there was a better way to say that. Story 9. So I interned at the local PD at a time when all stations received new radio devices. The new devices looked a bit like old cell phones and had a bright orange panic button on the top. It was meant for situations where, for example, a single officer was attacked and needed help. Pushing that button resulted in all communications on the standard channel 1 being turned to one-way communication only, so all units would listen to what's going on whenever the panic button was pressed, and an automatic all-free units call. All other units had to switch to the much weaker Channel 2 to communicate, but Channel 2 only allowed one device to speak, so either dispatch or Car 1 or Car 2, etc. could talk, but not multiple people at the same time like on Channel 1. To disable the panic mode, you had to push the bright orange button a certain way. Think of something like holding it for 3 seconds followed by 4 quick pushes. It could not be done remotely. This happened in a rather large city where some police stations are closed at night, usually the ones in the suburbs where few calls come in. That night, an older PO closed down the remotest station in the suburbs and decided to shut off the radio devices. You guessed it, he pushed the panic button on top because he thought that's where the devices were to be turned on and off. He had no clue what he did. He locked the station and went home. Since it was the first day of using the new devices, quite a few officers were unsure how to turn to Channel 2. Basically, all communication was blocked. Cue panic everywhere with frantic cell phone calls to dispatch. And dispatch was trying to figure out who closed that station, and thus had one of the only keys to open it, so the panic mode could be disabled. This unintentional all units call turned into an actual no units can call, though quite a few units were busy trying to resolve the situation. Story 10. All unit calls are more common and less critical than movies would have you believe. What you may be referring to instead is a code, Swordfish. A memorable one a few years back was during a celebrity night. They were doing this charity event with a couple of famous personalities, amongst which was Helen Mirren. At around 2 a.m., a code Swordfish is sent out and everyone rushes to the event. The scene was a coke-fueled bedlam of apocalyptic proportions. People screeching and tearing at each other's faces, a man biting into a live cat, a pool filled with foam, chlorine, and offal, and in the middle of all of this was Dame Mirren. She was riding bareback on a fat, hairy man, slapping her thighs in excitement and screaming her head off. I've never seen so much vigor and ecstasy in a single person before. She was making this weird facial thing like a horse blowing raspberries and throwing loud, wet farts one after another. We tased her, but she ran butt naked into the street, climbed a palm tree, and swung away from tree to tree. We caught her a day later when the coke wore off and she crept into a local chicken farm to sleep. So this is obviously a joke response. I don't super get it, but it seems specific enough that someone might. So if this means anything in particular to you and it's hilarious, please enlighten the rest of us. Story 11. Usually about once a month or so, we're taught that if you need backup, if stuff starts hitting the fan, call it in and worry about how many people come later. A unit was on patrol 2 weeks ago and some guy just started shooting at him. All the unit got out was 34th Street, 1033, I'm taking fire. 1033 being the code for send the cavalry/officer in need of assistance. It all ended fine, we caught the guy, no injuries. But you better believe every officer in our area dropped what they were doing and went. Another recent one is a mini riot that broke out at a candle vigil for a murder victim. An officer stepped in alone, bad move to stop the fight, started getting his butt handed to him. We ended up coming in, dispersed the crowd, and got out. Edit. Good chance to rant about a pet peeve of mine. When a 1033 goes out, there are always a few units who block the air with useless chatter. Hold me responding. What's their location? Dispatcher, I'll come back to my current assignment later. Do they need a rifle on scene? It drives me crazy. Get off the radio. Leave the air clear for the unit fighting for their damn lives. And every unit not on something absolutely necessary is required to respond. Why would you waste time to say you're going? Yeah, no duh. Story 12. Not a cop, but former practicing journalist, current PR person. Got a text about a shooting. Turns out a cop made a stop, got shot in the neck by the passenger, ended the life of the passenger, and shot the driver, and the driver got away. Cops from the 2 adjoining cities came, sheriff's deputies, airport police, and university police all came out in under 3 minutes. About 150 cops. Within 30 minutes, marshals, FBI, and ATF were there as well. Largest response I've ever seen. There were rounds that had been fired into the buildings surrounding that area. It was a mess. I was in the wrong place at the right time, I guess. Last story I ever did. Made the full-time switch to PR. Story 13. Might not have been an all-units call, but the day my daughter went unresponsive after having a febrile seizure. The dispatcher sent out unresponsive 2-year-old, and we had about 30 EMT, police, firefighters at our house in minutes. We live in a rural area, short distance from fire hall/ambulance hall. Thankfully, she was okay, but it was scary for us at the moment when her temperature wouldn't go down and then she passed out. Story 15. One that stands out was a chase which ended with a crash. 3 dead people and a trunk full of guns and drugs. But there's robberies, pursuit assists, and man with gun calls, all of which usually get opened up depending on the situation. And always officer down or needs immediate assistance, 1024, if you're close especially. They hit that button or shots start going off, I'm dropping everything, grabbing my 416, and traveling light speed and coming in with everything I've got. Story 16. Corrections here. When I was first on the job, I was doing an overtime shift in the maximum security unit. It was my Friday, 1 hour to go, and my birthday weekend at that. At 1400, while counting the minutes, a call comes out on the radio. Central Control, activate IMS, Housing Unit 3. Inmate is refusing to cuff up and has broken the fire sprinklers in his cell. Requesting A-team response, put B-team on standby. IMS is code for locking down everything. When you hear an IMS call, that means every inmate that is not in a cell must be secured. It's serious stuff because when an event like this occurs, other officers must leave their respective posts to assist, which means officers that remain on their units while their counterparts assist are now even more outnumbered, and that can easily spiral out of control. In short, any event like this is a serious security threat. In this case, Max was put on lockdown while the rest of the institution kept about their business. Interesting thing is, when an IMS comes out for Max, the collective prison sphincter cinches up a bit, because Max is where the real violent stuff goes down. An A-team is always the first to respond, but the kicker with this one was the command to put the B-team on standby. This means stuff has hit the fan, and anyone not immediately supervising inmates would be required to respond if so commanded. A B-team deployment to Max would send the rest of the 7,000-bed institution into a complete lockdown. All doctor's appointments, visits, movement throughout the building, completely locked down. You would hear Sally Port doors slamming shut everywhere. Really cool to experience it, honestly. There's also C, D, and E teams. If those were ever called, well, shouldn't get to that point. Anyway, being the new guy, I was elected to respond. When I arrived at the briefing area, we were immediately ordered to put our riot gear and biohazard coveralls on. Other officers helped us suit up so no skin was exposed. Only being a few weeks out of the academy, I crapped myself. This was not only my first A-team response, but also a biohazard. Blood, seed, urine, crap, which is it, Sergeant? All of them. I don't believe in Jesus, but I did briefly for that moment. When we were escorted into the unit, it was a war zone. The entire housing unit was full of gas, fire alarms blaring, red lights flashing everywhere. Even though we had our gas masks on, it didn't help, as we had to put them on in a hurry. The first responding officers had to go in without any protective gear. The dude was still in his cell. He had been gassed, maced, and hosed. He was unrelenting. I thought, he's gotta be on PCP. And then I remembered, this is Max. Nothing gets in or out. The inmate was butt naked, covered in God knows what, screaming unintelligibly. He was bleeding from his arms due to having bitten full chunks out of them. His cell was watered down from the sprinklers and from getting sprayed with any number of OC variants. The best part? This man in all his naked splendor and rage was 120% hard. Like, we're talking the fullest absolute you've ever seen. Something deep inside his primordial mind had gotten irrevocably turned on through all this. Even his dong being exposed to OC spray did nothing to stop it. We stack up in a line. For cell breaches, 6 of us would line up in a stick. The person on point always had the shield. 2 to 5 had the cuffs. The last guy was the moderator. They would give the inmate a final opportunity to comply because the pain was frickin' coming. Inmate, this is your last opportunity to approach the door and cuff up. Do you comply? Yeah, of course not. When this inmate saw us line up, however, something changed. As if the Holy Spirit spoke to him. He cuffed up, was dragged out of his cell, still hard by the way, and thrown into a shower. I didn't even get to breach the cell. The sight of 6 officers in full riot gear lining up outside of your door, and you knowing full well they're going to find a way to all fit in your cell in less than 3 seconds can be a really humbling experience. The end. Edit. Sorry for the letdown of a conclusion. The reality of these situations is that we have to contain the threat. There are only 2 outcomes: containment or people getting murdered. I highly recommend the HBO documentary Gladiator Days, which depicts the outrageous violence at the institution I served at. I wish we got to know what in his mind changed. What made this guy who was absolutely losing it, causing the most chaos these people have probably seen in a long time, just all of a sudden be like, oh yeah, no, you're right, I'll comply. You would think they're in some kind of blind rage at that point, but it seemed this guy had at least some wits about him. Anyway, OP, don't worry about the letdown of a conclusion, because if we think about it, any other conclusion is significantly worse for everyone involved. We got the good ending. Story 17. My father was a highway federal officer, and this was in Mexico. They were armed with light machine guns of standard caliber because stuff gets real against cartels here in the northern border. But it's so big and spaced out, you have to deal with it yourself because the nearest unit can be an hour plus away, and they have reinforced trucks. Anyway, he once told me that he encountered a convoy of 3 Humvees while he was on the side of the road relatively hidden. He opened fire at the first Humvee's tires and it loses control. The other 2 break, and like 12 dudes with Kalashnikovs come out to fire in random directions. They probably didn't see where they got shot from, and my father lays down suppressing fire on them until 2 units come from each side of the road from a relatively nearby station to arrest what's left of them. Story 18. A friend of mine was a canine cop with a local small police department. He was a solid guy, but by his own admission, wasn't the brightest. As an example, he couldn't learn the German commands for the dog, so they had to teach the dog English. Anyway, one day an all-call, or whatever it's called, came in. It was regarding a shooting, which is rare here. My friend was taking a dump at the time, and his dog was in his SUV. The cops went running out and jumped in whatever car was available. The canine was in the back seat. When some other cop jumped in the SUV, the canine got spooked and clamped down on the cop's neck. He freaked out and started screaming into his radio. All the other cops thought he arrived at scene and had been shot. My friend, hearing this on the radio and knowing how his dog acts, ran out of the bathroom pulling his pants up. Havoc ensued. If I were a cop, I'd want to work for a small police department. Story 19. Not a cop, but I once got an all-units call to my house. Backstory. My mom was dating a big druggie and everyone knew who he was. And our address. I was around 15 and one night he went off the rails and was beating the crap out of my mom. I got involved just in time to see him swing at my sister, who was 7 at the time. I ran for the phone and called it in. I got as far as the address when he grabbed me by the neck and threw me. Well, the dispatcher heard my garbled yells and called it in as a possible homicide in progress. That, combined with his reputation, sent every single cop in the surrounding jurisdictions flying our way. By the end of it, I think there were 20+ officers at our house. I ended up hitting him with my mom's cast iron skillet to keep him there just as the first officer showed up. He was super cool about it and pretended he didn't see a thing. It was a terrible night, and my mom was mad at me for months, but man, you do not screw with my little sister. Story 20. I served in West Belfast, Northern Ireland. Due to the high threat level in my division, we would patrol in 2 armored Land Rovers, each with minimum 3 armed officers, one of which would have an assault rifle or SMG. Basically, we could handle most scenarios. One day, however, our vehicle was in an intentional head-on collision with a stolen car, as it was driving towards local children playing in the street. This resulted in our front wheel arch bending to the point the vehicle could travel no more. In a few minutes, the community we were there to protect turned against us. It was like Black Hawk Down. A few hundred people came out of the woodwork, as they realized we were an easy target. Petrol bombs and bricks rained on top of us as we attempted to pursue the car thief on foot. We jumped in the back of our vehicle and called for assistance. In under 5 minutes, a fleet of approximately 5 to 6 armored Land Rovers appeared from the neighboring division and drove the crowd back. They managed to tow us to safety, and we lived to get bricked another day. Story 21. As the story goes in Duluth, Minnesota, for a long time the radio signal that available officers could meet for Dunkin' Donuts was the code word Broken Arrow. One day, someone not from the city was in the local newsroom when this was overheard. He got alarmed and told the rest of the newsroom that the code word likely meant the police station was at that moment overwhelmed and outgunned and they were calling all available units to help. Reporters rushed to the scene to find donuts. That code word is no longer used. Story 22. Not a police officer, but I had an incident where 20 police cars were in my neighborhood the day my mom passed away. They wouldn't let us see her until after the autopsy came back and she had a heart attack. My entire house was filled and it was a decent-sized house. One was sitting in my gaming chair looking through things like, dude, you're not gonna find anything on a 14-year-old girl's desk. It was around 9 a.m. when I found her, and by the time they all left, it was close to 11 p.m. TLDR, my mom died and police stayed for almost 14 hours. OP, I feel like you're leaving out some important context here. Why? What did they suspect happened? And why was your house the one being searched? Did they think you did it? Was there suspicion against your dad? Like, you gotta give us more. Story 23. My uncle told me a story once about getting called on a code swordfish, which is a bit more serious than all units. There was this coked up 6-foot-something huge guy who had just shot up a liquor store and was tearing down the interstate. He told us there were probably about 15 cop cars already tailing him when he caught up, with 2 state troopers leading. When he got onto the interstate, he was practically right next to the guy. They ran his car off the road and the dude jumps out while it's still moving and runs across the interstate. He jumps over the guardrail and falls about 10 feet to the other side, and then he runs across that into the woods. The 2 state troopers got out as soon as they saw him running and took off after him, with my uncle not far behind. One of them didn't realize how far the fall was and broke his ankle. The other chased down the guy. By the time my uncle got there, the other state trooper was staggered and about to pass out from how hard his butt got kicked. My uncle, without breaking his sprint, charged the guy, throwing the heaviest haymaker he could. The guy went out immediately. Later, they had to go to the hospital to file reports since they had to take the guy in for the drug stuff. My uncle was sitting on a chair with his hat over his hand in his lap. The doctor comes in and asks how big of a flashlight did he hit the dude with. My uncle just lifts his hat and shows his bruised and swollen hand. Apparently, he hit the guy so hard it fractured his temple and very nearly ended his life. Story 24. Our calls are a little different. Mostly rescues, but will sometimes fall in with the local police departments. Once got called for a dirt bike accident on a trail. Story starts out that kid's broken up pretty bad, lost, and can't get out of the trail. It's a 7-mile trail and only wide enough for one ATV to get through at a time. All traffic goes one way. None of us live that way, so none of us have a bike with us. And I'm the only one who's ridden the trail. I'm headed to the trailhead while I'm listening to the radio traffic, thinking to myself, you dumb idiots. It's going to be at least 4 hours before we find and drag this kid out of there. Why the hell are you calling in the helicopter? There's no landing zone and they aren't going to wait 4+ hours for you. Local search and rescue screwing stuff up. They'll be on IV fluids within the hour. Helicopter flies through, then leaves. Oh, big surprise there. Word gets out that another group riding got the kid and they're taking him to the highway. Group actually rides through to the end of the trailhead. Kid's fine, nothing broken but his bike. He had earbuds on inside of his helmet. When he went down, he hit his head hard enough to break off both of the earbuds inside of his ears. And just like that, I will never wear earbuds inside my helmet. And another one which I was off for, but the original call is too good. Dispatch calls saying, "There's an alligator eating a person in the river." Now, this is pretty big and one of our worst fears. It'll impact how we manage alligators from then on. We've got to get out there, catch, and end a 12+ foot alligator and recover a body that no one's reported missing. So they all scramble to get a boat in the water before this thing leaves and goes to sleep for 2 weeks with a full belly, because then the half-eaten body sinks and no amount of dragging or side sonar will help find it in the flooded river. Other agencies are getting out there too. They find the alligator and it's eating a dog. So now these guys are cutting up about it, and out of nowhere, they notice a body floating in the river. Turns out some guy ran from highway patrol days before, tried to cross the river, drowned, and happened to float up at exactly the right time. I did get to catch the dog eater though. Son of a gun made the paper. In all honesty, I think the couple who originally made the call accidentally drowned their pet when the river flooded and the alligator found the carcass later. They were guilt-ridden and needed a scapegoat for their ignorance, and 2 alligators died for it. Because of the media, we were forced to remove one. We knew there's no realistic way to get the one who actually ate the dog, so we just had a trapper set a line and remove the first gator over 8 foot that took the bait. As soon as you remove one, another shows up. So this couple sees another big gator and raises hell that we didn't catch the right one. So we set a line for the next one, comes out just over 11 feet. We're just like, for the love of God, just don't see another alligator, people. In between these two, I was out with a partner looking for the dog murderer. We mostly hooked them on rod and reel. Based on the pictures and location, we found it. We hooked into it, and immediately knew we would never catch it. This huge guy pulled an 18-foot boat up a flooded river like it was soggy newspaper. Had us dipping so low we were worried about capsizing. Swam under a log and we kept fighting till the line finally broke. After being under for well over 45 minutes, this thing pops up like 15 feet from us and crawls up onto a fallen tree and sandbar. Starts huffing trying to get some oxygen back. We are just stunned staring at it. Like we just made the placid lake monster upset and it's coming for revenge. My partner's been doing this for many years and he says it's the largest gator he's ever seen. The thing was over 13 foot and was still partially submerged. Coloration matched the picture of the dog eater better, and this was it. But he's staying on this planet for a while longer. Story 25. Not a cop, but hopefully relevant. I was at one of the lakefront beaches in Chicago a few summers ago when, according to news report later, a party a quarter mile down the trail started getting out of hand. Apparently party got way overcrowded, so a pair of cops rolled up in a squad car to get the mariachi band to quit, in hopes of folks losing interest and dispersing. This was a no-go, and crowd responded by, among other things, breaking the squad car windows and surging in around the cops, one of whom put out an "oh crap" call. I don't know the details, but apparently Chicago cops have a code that basically means, drop whatever you're doing, get the hell over here. Because within 90 seconds, Wilson Avenue looked, and I kid you not, like that epic car chase at the end of Blues Brothers. If I had to guess, must have been at least 50 cars hauling it onto the lakefront. One after the other. like a high-speed parade of cop cars celebrating, "We're gonna screw you up and then arrest everybody" day, which, well, basically it was. Story 26. Not a police officer, but the person all units were focused on. My high school had an open campus, so some friends and I were at one of their houses a few blocks away for lunch one day. We were messing around with an airsoft gun in his backyard. Now, some neighbors saw it and called the police thinking it was real. We were ordered to come out of the house with a megaphone and swarmed by the SWAT team once we were all out. I'm talking 15 officers with full armor and assault weapons. Once I was on the ground, I looked around and saw 4 or 5 police cars parked across the street with snipers on us. We didn't end up getting in any trouble because, hey, didn't do anything wrong, but I think the response was justified based on the call and concern over school shootings. Story 27. Never a policeman, but I used to work in the security industry. I was quite well known by the local officers and had quite a few dealings with them, both in and out of work. One day I got a call on my mobile phone while on duty. Bit odd. It was the local custody sergeant. Apparently there had been a call that a child was being attacked in some woodland next to my site. I was being asked to run to the site of the report as I would be there first. A good 2 or 3 minutes in front of the police. I went and pretty soon was scouring this little woods for anyone I could find. The whole time I was crapping myself. What if I find someone doing something to a kid? What do I do? I mean, I probably shouldn't end their lives. Could I not? Could I just frighten him off the kid and take control there? Would I be able to control my anger? All those thoughts happened in a flash, plus more. I did a few frantic laps of this place before hearing cars pulling up behind me outside the wood. Next thing I know, there was the entire local police force in there with me. We never found anyone. No sign. Horrible moment. Story 28. The first and only cavalry charge I've ever seen was in Brooklyn. There was this ride on the W12 in Bowery and Coney Island in the late 80s called the Polar Express. You've all seen it. It's that ride that goes really fast around, then it goes backwards while blasting really loud music. Stupid, but whatever. This also attracted every broke butt in Brooklyn who couldn't afford to get into a club, or were thrown out of all of them on weekends, and, as such, was a freaking nightmare. There were always fights, but you learned to let them tire themselves out a bit before you waded in because things could get ugly. I was detailed to this thing with a small army of other rookie cops on the 4th of July weekend. We were told in no uncertain terms to not go into the crowd, ever. Nothing is happening in there that's ever worth your safety. So of course a brawl breaks out and someone immediately goes in. Now please understand, you have to go now. You can't leave the other guy alone even if he did screw up. The crowd parts for us like Moses parting the Red Sea and then closes back in on us and the airmail, rocks and bottles, come sailing. We pretty much go back to back a la 300, but we are vastly outnumbered and out inebriated. We're fighting our way out and there's backup trying to fight its way in to get to us, but it's taken time. And I don't know if you've literally ever fought for your life, but God, it's tiring. That adrenaline jolt only buys you so much time. Then I saw it. A flying wedge formation of mounted, charging down West 12th into the crowd at full speed, with the sergeant in the middle with his nightstick out, held like he was ordering a charge, and a crap-eating grin that said he wanted to do this for his entire life. Hell, I think the horse was smiling too. You'll hear the term crash a lot and it's hyperbole. Not here. No. These guys crashed into this riot, sending bodies flying everywhere, like the bow of a great warship cutting through a stormy sea. A blue, black, leather and rowan battleship. The crowd dispersed in about 3 minutes flat, equally as stunned by what they just saw as honestly the foot cops were. I know sometimes people complain about the cost of maintaining mounted police units because they're seen as unnecessary backup for tourist photos, and oh my god, I am living proof that they are so much more valuable than that. Story 29. Late to the thread, but here goes. As with most, not a police officer. I was a boarding officer in the USCG many moons ago. Typical 4-man boat crew on a USCG 41-foot. Early one morning on a normal harbor patrol, I notice a 75-foot motor yacht illegally anchored. Given the ship traffic coming and going in the pre-dawn light, it was totally unsafe. So I radioed the station and they advised we make contact. I grabbed the searchlight and illuminated the yacht, and when I lit up the guy sleeping in the aft deck in a chair, as soon as my light hit him, he bounced up and ran inside. If only he hadn't done that. This prompted our boat driver at the time to overreact, slamming the throttles forward, hitting the sirens/lights, and saying repeatedly over the loudspeaker, "This is the United States Coast Guard, prepare to be boarded!" Of course, now everyone's adrenaline is flowing, and what was just an illegal anchoring situation was now in the mind of these other guys, the world's biggest drug bust about to go down. See, the ship had a Mexican registry, so we come alongside and immediately, make the determination that the ship is too large to be boarded, so we escort them back to station. This is the all units call part. By the time we get back to station, every single member of my unit plus every crew member on the larger cutters that tied up at the station were all on deck watching. There was another military base nearby with a large police force, so their police were on scene along with the local sheriff's department K-9 unit, US Customs, DEA, and some guys in suits whose affiliation I was never able to figure out. Probably FBI or CGI, who knows. This was literally all hands on deck. A preliminary search of the vessel found a very small quantity of marijuana in the bedside table of the master cabin. There were 3 generations of a Mexican family enjoying their vacation, and it looked like mom or dad might have enjoyed a joint or two in the evenings back in their cabin. That's what it looked like to me. To everyone else, it looked like the reincarnation of Pablo Escobar. They ripped that yacht apart in the name of space accountability. When the overall outside measurement is greater than the total of all the inside compartment measurements, leading one to believe there may be hidden compartments, whatever, they even ripped up the decks with saws thinking there may be something stashed along the keel pipes. As a lowly E3 pretty fresh out of boot camp, my part in all of this was armed guard for the family. I stood there with a Beretta 92F on my side and an M16 in my hands guarding Grandma, Grandpa, Mom, Dad, and the 3 kids. And as I stood there watching their boat be ripped to shreds over the discovery of a couple of joints, I asked myself, was I really supposed to shoot them if they tried to run or escape? Over a couple of joints and being illegally anchored, the illegal anchoring that I noticed and brought to everyone's attention, I discovered later this boat was not on any of our watch lists, and no one ever did find anything. The boat stayed tied up in a nearby marina for a couple of months and then just disappeared one day. I'm not sure whatever became of the boat or the family, but I hope they're well. I'll never forget that day. I had such guilt and such remorse for what those poor people endured that I became very disenchanted with my choice to join. I loved the search and rescue part of the CG's mission, and I have some great memories of some truly good deeds I got to do for many people, but the law enforcement part stuck in my craw and I was choking on it. So when our wonderful US Congress failed to come up with a budget and we shut down the government briefly, the chief walked into morning muster one day and said, "Anyone want out? Come to my office at 1100 hours today for processing to the inactive ready reserve." It was like a dream come true. I got everything I needed out of my time in service, and I did some good while I was there. But never again would I find myself hovering over the elderly and children with an automatic weapon, or ruining someone's day/vacation/property/life for a couple of joints. And for that, I am extremely grateful. You know what? I bet these people weren't even compensated for the boat being destroyed because they found the joints. I bet they were like, our search was justified because we found illegal substances, a class 1 or whatever the US system is drug. And yeah, the nationality of the family definitely didn't help matters, and implicit biases that may exist. This sucks for them. They super didn't deserve this. OP, I really respect how you responded and how you feel about it though. Props for that. Story 30. Not a cop, but had all units on an Air Force base called on me. We were in a hardened aircraft shelter that had vaults in the floor with nukes. We had just installed an engine in a jet and I had to run it for operational checks. There was also an external tank on the jet that needed emptying, so during the run I tried to burn the fuel out of the tank so we could remove it. The max allowable ground run limit unrestrained is 85%. It was the weekend, so no one was around to bust me if I went higher. I got up to 89% and it's still going slow. The ground guy asked me what I was at. He told me Bill had done 93%. Oh, well, the challenge was laid down. I ended up jamming on the brakes and hitting full mill power 102%. Here's the thing. The vaults had vibration sensors to prevent people from tunneling into the nukes. Next thing I know, I look out of the cockpit to see every cop on base in front of the shelter. Now it's loud as hell in the shelter and these cops are running in with M16s while trying to cover their ears. They're screaming at my ground guy to get me to shut down. I'm laughing my butt off watching these dudes with guns trying to function with the noise and holding a rifle. So I drop back down to idle and they're screaming for me to shut down. The cooldown period for a high power run is 5 minutes. So I run at idle for every second of the 5 minutes, watching these guys suffer the noise of a GE-129 jet engine. After I shut down, they force me out of the cockpit and evacuate us to 100 meters in front of the shelter. I track down the highest ranking guy to explain why the alarm got set off. A bunch of cops went to secure and inspect the shelter. I was talking to the guy in charge when one of the new cops comes running up saying they have a suspicious package. So I ask him, what the hell is he talking about? He said there's a bag next to a giant red box. I asked him if he's talking about my backpack next to the snap-on toolbox. His boss called him an idiot and they all left. Our commander showed up and talked me into never doing that ever freaking again, and to have a nice weekend. TLDR, nuke alarms bring all the boys to the yard. Story 31. I'm not a police officer, but back when I was a reporter, I had to write up a fun little story for the paper. The local university had a Greek week, in which all the frats and sororities would compete for charity. At the end of the week, they would gather together in carpool over to the local drive-in. Normally, the campus required any gathering of more than a dozen or so people be registered, so they could send an officer to monitor for underage drinking. But because this wasn't an official party, no one bothered to tell campus police. The plan was to go elsewhere. Sure enough, the neighbors complained about an unauthorized party, as there were maybe a few dozen kids milling about, loading up for the carpool, so a couple of the campus police were sent over to move the kids along. When they get there, there's kids everywhere and they're talking crap to cops. They thought it was ridiculous that someone called the cops on a carpool. One of the officers then slipped on a beer bottle while walking into the frat house, but his partner didn't see why he had fallen. He heard a crash, then sees his senior partner on the ground. Thinking his partner has been hit by a thrown bottle, he rushes over to the cruiser and called in for backup, but he was relatively green and made several little mistakes. Instead of using normal language, he decided to use codes. Instead of saying, "Hey, we're clearing out that unauthorized party and we could use a couple more officers," he used the codes for riot in progress, officers down on the scene, and need immediate backup. Oh, and instead of using the campus police only band, they used the shared county band. Well, riot in progress, officers down is apparently something dispatchers take a little seriously. An all-units call was then immediately repeated to the 4 adjacent counties plus most of the individual cities and towns. Ultimately, a couple hundred cars screamed their way to campus. Cooler heads eventually prevailed, but not until a few hundred cops from about a dozen departments had donned their anti-riot gear, fired tear gas into a crowd that had no idea they were rioting, and had detained everyone in a 2-block radius. Without realizing or intending to, the rookie had summoned nearly every officer in a 50-mile area. Story 32. I'm not a police officer, but last week there was a big standoff in the town over from me. A man held his wife hostage for a few days. I'm unsure of the backstory, but I believe the relationship was ending. When SWAT arrived, the home exploded when they tried to enter, and 6 officers were injured, so they ended up calling officers from other surrounding towns. It was all over the news and you could see SWAT and POs everywhere. The man had a lot of smaller sheds in the backyard and everything started to catch fire. I believe the woman got out, but they found the man's charred body inside once they got the fire under control. Story 33. UK 2010. Weatherspoons on a crossroad on the main road out of the city, local football derby match just finished in pub. Chatting with friends across from the pub. Suddenly, 2 to 3 police vans or cars from each of 4 directions come steaming up. Blue lights and sirens. 10 to 12 vehicles altogether. Big guy confronting male and female officers out front suddenly goes stiff and hits the deck. Cuffed and hauled away, hit with a taser gun. 5 minutes later, they're all winding down and leaving when police officer turns up, panting on his push bike. Had clearly biked a couple miles to respond. Huge round of applause as he arrives. Story 35. I'm not a police officer, but was a nurse at a prison. Every year there is a picnic for the inmates serving life sentences, where they have family that can come in and visit in the yard. One year during the picnic, there were approximately 200 people milling about in the yard of the prison, when inside the maximum security common room a fight broke out between 2 inmates. When one of the officers came up behind one of the inmates to try and separate them, she kicked backward and hit his shin in just the right place with her prison-issue boots and shattered his tibia. One of the other responding officers in the pod called across the radio, "Officer injured, officer down, send everyone." The radios are monitored by the local PD as well in case something serious happens like a riot or hostage situation. So the local PD intercepts this message and sends everyone. I'm serious when I say everyone, by the way. There were police officers, federal investigators, ambulances, fire trucks, and even Parks Department vehicles responding. At this point, there's so much chaos that none of the officers in the Central Command know what's going on, or what the status of the injured officer actually is. So against protocol, they throw open the gates and all of these responding officers descend upon the prison. The poor 200 people in the yard were swooped down upon by the literal 100 officers with guns. Fortunately, the situation was cooled down quickly and no one else was injured, but it was so congested with cars, the gates to the prison were wide open with empty police cars left running and unattended. I was actually surprised that not a single inmate tried to take advantage and sneak out, although the prison was on lockdown for the next 24 hours while they tried to complete the investigation and sort out the chaos. Story 36. If you want to know how screwed up our immigration system is, here you go. I was a CBP officer for 2 years, so according to some on here, I wasn't a real cop, but I nonetheless was in law enforcement. If someone is traveling from certain countries in Europe and Asia, they get a visa waiver. They can visit for up to 3 months on business or pleasure without a visa. So this dude comes through on visa waiver, and at the time, there were 2 different systems to process travelers. One was integrated and the fingerprints and pictures went into the systems with the passport info at the same time. At the midfield or connections terminal, someone coming to the US but going on to a different city, we used a system that had 2 programs, where one had fingerprints and picture, or biometrics, and the other processed the passport. You had to wait for the biometrics to come back before you approved the passport. We had this really dumb officer working for us. I don't know how she made it through academy because she had a partial understanding of English, and from what we gathered was a mail-order bride from some Asian country. Might have been Thailand. Rest easy though, weary travelers. Most CBP officers are far more qualified than she was. We think she knew someone to get the job. As she was processing a passenger, English or Scottish, can't remember, she didn't let the biometrics finish and admitted him. After the inspection, he hit on biometrics, and he had a bench warrant in NYC. Everyone available had to search the airport for this guy. About 20 of us ran through the airport looking for him. We thought it was some catastrophic crime. So the funny part, and I'm likely going to get downvoted for this, but she had a hard time telling one white person from the other. I know everyone jokes we think all Asians look alike, but it works vice versa too. And we only had a copy of the bench warrant, not a photo to go by. She sees like 6 different guys she thinks are him, but they're all American. Finally, we find the guy and he's very friendly. We ask him about the bench warrant and he says he got in trouble in New York and they told him it wasn't a big deal. We called the originator of the warrant after taking the guy back to the inspection area with us, and this is where things got complicated. He had been found high by a cop and pretty much taken in and dismissed. The warrant was for a follow-up court date, but for some reason it wasn't mandatory. It was sort of just there in case he got arrested in NYC, so someone knew that there had been previous contact. So we could have let him go. The issue was that he admitted on his entry form that he'd been a drug addict, which is immediate denial of entry. We asked him about it, and he said he was on his way to a treatment facility run by Eric Clapton's foundation, and that he had been clean, but thought he might relapse. So his parents footed the bill so he could stay clean. He had the entire catalog with him and showed it to us, but we had to deport him. Had he not shown up with the hit and admitted to being a drug user, we could have let him through. In fact, the supervisor was going to give him a pass, but you can't legally edit an entry document once it's been stamped with an entry stamp. We told the guy we had to deport him, and he just smiled and was like, "Okay, gonna get a bite to eat?" He didn't even seem bothered. We told him he could come back with a B1 or B2 visa, and he said he would apply as soon as he got home. He said, "It's just a bump in the road. I'd rather go through this clean than go through anything I went through the past few years." I know it may sound wrong, but I wish he had gotten away. It was her screw-up that caught him, and we scrambled to catch a guy who was just trying to better himself. I still think about this guy, and it really made me think about how I felt about drug addiction at the time. The guy's attitude told us he couldn't be defeated, and hey, I totally respected that. Now, in fairness, should have done his research and gotten a visa. You can get a visa with his history, especially for medical reasons. We just admit so many people who are dirtbags that it shames me we had to send a decent guy home. Story 37. Obligatory, not a cop, but I'm a security guard at a homeless shelter, and about 3 weeks ago, some dirtbag rushed me and took a swing. I stepped back and flinched hard at him, meaning I was intending to swing 100%, but I balked, because in my head, I kept saying, "No, you'll be fired. He's got to be close enough to threaten you for real or hit you to not get fired." And it was enough just to rile him up a bit, and he squared up on me. At that moment, all of my bros, no exaggeration, 15 or 20, rushed to my aid, getting in between me and Raging Dude. They started screwing him up. So I rushed inside the mayhem, like climbing over people, trying to pull out my would-be assaulter before he's beat to death. And about 15 police cars suddenly came flying into the shelter campus. Later, one of my cop bros told me a random uninvolved client called and told him I was being jumped by a group of homeless dudes with no backup, and being the stand-up, badass dudes they are, they rolled everyone as fast as possible to try and help. And if you're wondering why so many, understand this and only this. Homeless people don't give a single crap about anything ever, and you can never predict what they might do. Never. Story 38. 3 years ago, my sergeant was shot, and his life ended, attempting to talk to a child toucher probation violation warrant suspect out of his house. Guy shot him directly in the forehead through a window at an angle they didn't believe was possible, hence the fact he was standing at a window. I'd been pepper sprayed that morning at a less than lethal instructor course, and while driving home from a neighboring town, I saw dozens of emergency vehicles flying through town. I responded as well because no one was answering the radio and was met at the perimeter by another agency in our jurisdiction. The guy was my friend and told me what had happened. Headed to the hospital after that. Halfway there, I stopped to call my family so they wouldn't think the mental health officer murdered was me, and completely lost it. After regaining composure, I got to the ER and met with the rest of our unit and Sergeant's wife. Hearing her screams standing over his dead body haunts me to this day. Guy gave up. My sergeant's wife didn't want to go through a multiple-year ordeal, and within 6 months, the piece of crap had signed a plea deal for life without parole as long as death penalty was taken off the table. Story 39. Not a cop, but I'm pretty sure I saw one of these Saturday. I was sitting in the car with my son eating some ice cream in a gas station parking lot when a cop car went by. Kid, of course, loved it. The lights and sirens are on. A few minutes later, we see more going the same direction, and one lone car coming from the other way. I'm assuming the lone car was the original one we saw go by, as there were no others that came from that way. Dude is flying, and the cars coming the other way stop, so I'm wondering what's going on. Turns out it was a chase with a dark SUV I didn't see until they were passing us. All the other cop cars turned around in the street right beside me. I saw at least 8 cop cars go by in a span of a few minutes. Best show the kid's ever seen, because I'd never seen anything like this before, so I'm freaking out, and he's seeing all this stuff go on right beside him. Learned the next morning that State Patrol was eventually involved and performed a pit maneuver on the SUV to make it stop. This is a tiny city, by the way. We never see stuff like this. Story 40. A large wedding in Brooklyn. It was midnight, so there weren't that many units to begin with. The family started warring with each other, and when we arrived, they of course turned on us. And everyone, and I mean everyone, was brawling. We turned out 3 cars that night, and one of them was out on a homicide, so we're just yelling, "Keep 'em coming, Central." The duty captain, the supervisory officer for the patrol bureau, shows up, looks around, sees this is quickly becoming a rout, and calls a citywide 1013, which means a designated number of cars from every borough task force in the city. That was one of them. Story 41. One that stands out is an officer down call. It was a very slow night. One officer was at the hospital sitting on a suspect. Some of us were at the station, and one unit was on a traffic stop. He'd taken a long time, and dispatch status checked him. He said he was fine. This particular office we were sitting in, you can hear the 911 line ringing very loudly. All of a sudden, both the 911 lines and non-emergency landlines go insane. Then I hear it over the radio. Officer down, X and Y Street, units code 3, officer down. What happened after that is sort of a blur, but we jumped in our cars and flew 100 miles an hour. The neighboring agency, which is very large, occasionally receives our 911 calls too. There is no hyperbole when I say their entire division responded. 15 plus cars, over 50 officers. They were amazing in their assistance and care for us. I was first on scene. I saw a ring of people standing over something and staring down. I politely told them to move and saw my friend lying on his back. I did my best to comfort him. Some old lady started praying over him, and I was a jerk to her. I feel bad about that one. My friend kept telling me to call his wife and sister and tell them, and I kept telling him that he would tell them himself. I knelt down and held his head in my lap. I removed his gun and shield and gave them to my boss. He was okay. The suspect he'd stopped lied to him about his identity and took off. He dragged my friend with his truck and then ran over his ankle, breaking it. He was shipped off to the ER. The rest of that evening was long and stressful. Detectives, administration, crime scene, news reporters, etc. I don't want to give any more details about the suspect, but he was a wanted felon, convicted of assault of 2 children under 10. Through thousands of hours of effort and investigation by us and our brother/sister officers from other agencies, he was caught hiding out in South Texas. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison for what he did to my friend and violating his parole. After that sentence, he was tried in federal court for felony charge and received another 20 years in federal prison, non-concurrent. Anyway, my friend is better and back to work. That night was one of the most difficult moments in my career. I can still hear the radio transmission in my head. I get goosebumps anytime I think about it. Story 42. Portland police arrest man after alleged Star Wars lightsaber assault at Toys R Us. Police arrested a man who allegedly assaulted 3 people with a blue lightsaber at Hayden Island Toys R Us Wednesday night. A 911 caller reported the incident about 9:50 p.m. and said the man was inside the store, swinging the Star Wars weapon of choice at customers. While the caller was on the phone, the man then left the store, lightsaber in hand, and walked out to the parking lot. Officers tried to arrest the man, but he kept swinging at him. The sergeant said one tried to use his taser on the suspect, but the device didn't work. Another officer used his taser and made contact, but the man knocked one of the wires away with the lightsaber. The officers finally arrested the man after grabbing him and pinning him to the ground. The suspect was treated by medics at the scene and taken to an area hospital for mental evaluation. None of the victims of the lightsaber assault needed medical attention, though. Okay, was this an all units call? Did that happen? Because just looking at the post, this is a copy and paste from a news article. Like, OP's not even really the OP of this comment. They're reposting the news in a Reddit comment. I feel like the image of a dude fending off officers with a lightsaber is funny enough to tell it anyway, but also, what? Why are we just copy-pasting news articles into Reddit threads? What are we doing? Story 43. Well, my dad was a cop. He passed away. We live in a small city which has a small police detachment. He told me of this. The city borders the Pan American Highway, so there's always high traffic in the zone. Bear that in mind. Someone tipped the border patrol that a huge convoy of drugs had already passed their zone and is heading to my city, but it's heavily guarded, with watchers. A car with guys that will alert of police blockades and so, often a few miles ahead of the convoy. And grunts, the ones in charge of safety of the whole thing. In one of those unknown coincidences of life, the cops were doing a few checkup points on different roads in order to catch tax dodgers, and the watchers got stopped by one of those. One of the guys shot an officer in the chest, punctured lung, and survived the shot, though. All hell broke loose. The radio went on, officer down, dispatch DIS, dispatch all. The DIS is a special division like US SWAT, heavy weaponry and SWAT training. Long story short, blockades galore and cops everywhere. Units from more than 2 hours away came up. Things got very tense for a couple of hours. At one end of the blockade, they were able to spot the convoy and all the units moved there. The convoy got detained. 3 wounded cops, 3 grunts died, 2 wounded, and 6 tons of drugs. Story 44. Former CO for a state prison, and I was the reason for the call. We would often work understaffed, as the state doesn't pay as well as counties or municipalities. I was freshly certified, 2011, completed the academy and state certification less than 60 days prior, and I was called by one of the dorms that only had 1 staff member assigned. She had noticed suspicious activity. I grabbed another staff member, female, who completed the academy even more recently than I, and went down the wing. There were too many inmates in a single room. They're not supposed to be inside any room in which they don't reside, so we tossed the extras and made the 2 who stayed in the room sit outside while we searched. Mistake number 1. Always handcuff an inmate prior to a search. Go through his property and end up finding a very small implement. Looked like a cartridge from pen or something with a small bit of razor melted into it, maybe a quarter of a US dime. Inmate claims it's for cleaning between his teeth. Normally, finding any kind of contraband is an automatic lockup, and especially a weapon. But I have a touchy lieutenant on that night, the kind who would overturn a lockup because I didn't clear it with him first. I go upstairs and call it in, clear it with the lieutenant, and he tells me to escort him to see him and he'll make the determination. Now, this is where it goes sideways. I return to the wing, pull my cuffs and tell the inmate to turn around. Inmate starts flapping his gums about, "It's my birthday, this is BS, blah blah blah." Not hearing it. Tell him to turn around one final time. Before I realize what happened, I'm recovering from being hit in the face, and at this point I have dropped the cuffs on the ground. Mistake number 2. I never saw him ball up or swing. I just remember regaining my balance and thinking, this dude just hit me? A second later, I see him attacking the female officer I was with. I'm still green and I'm not thinking clearly. I grab the inmate and put him into a headlock. Mistake number 3. Not an approved move, not by a long shot. I start punching him in the face. I yell to the female to ask if she's okay, and she's fully engaged and active. She comes over to grab the inmate and attempt to restrain him. At this point, the inmate has decided he's not a fan of my armpit and would like to be free. He turns his head in and bites the hell out of me. Reflexively, mistake number 4, I let go of the inmate and gasp in pain. He turns towards the female officer again, who has not been successful in restraining the inmate, and her glasses are in several dozen pieces on the floor. This gives me a moment where the inmate and I aren't sharing a personal bubble. I hit the button on my body alarm and then rip it off. It has a secondary activation where the string on the top of the device becomes dislodged if you remove it from your belt, and I hit the red button on my radio. I find out later that the woman in the bubble, the officer station, did not know what was going on, and did not know we were in trouble until the control room called a zone alarm, something to the effect of, "There's a body alarm activated in Echo Dorm Wing 1. These things are usually not taken seriously. She saw what was happening, and that was when the emergency was declared. Back to the situation, he's swinging at the female officer again, and I lock him in yet another headlock. Hey, I'm a slow learner. This time on the opposite side of my body. I'm punching him in the face and trying to bounce his head off the wall, but the angles and my hold on him are off. It's not having the desired effect. At this point, I have an epiphany. Neither of us have deployed chemical agents. I rip my holster, yank my OC, and begin spraying the inmate. The inmate is in the middle of biting me again when the spray hits him in the eyes and nose. He lets go and manages to get a good mouthful as well. At this point, we go down and hit the floor. His fight is completely gone and he wants nothing but for it to be over. I kept the hold until the female officer was able to successfully secure his hands with cuffs. I stood up and was going to begin clearing the wing, and at that point the internal security officer, who'd been performing outside building checks at the time, bursts into the wing and began clearing it out as he ran down to where we were, back of the wing. He was the first person on scene and he was outside the fence when the call was made. He was 6'4" and like 400 plus pounds, but ran like a banshee and beat out all the more fit individuals. We were roomies and best friends. It might have had something to do with it. The lieutenant and a few other people show up. We were ushered off the wing and they began the post-use of force recording. Before the end of the night, the inmate was escorted to medical, spit on the officer transporting him, screamed at the top of his lungs about how he was in Vietnam and had both of his arms cut off and that we treated him unfairly, the whole boot. He was moved from medical to confinement pretty quickly, where he refused to decon shower, so they sprayed him again. This time he was naked, so you can probably imagine how that went down. It took them a week to transfer the inmate out. The female officer I was with was related to someone who'd worked with the department for a long time. They had to specially handpick a team of people who had never worked with him to transport the inmate. In the meantime, she and I were on outside vehicle patrol for the week. Because he had blood in his mouth when he bit me, I ended up on the cocktail. Thankfully, I can say after 7 years, I am free of HIV or any other communicable stuff. I left corrections in 2015, and now I'm in IT. I make better money, not including overtime, but I enjoyed the time with the wife, and no computer has ever bitten me, slung their waist at me, or gunned me. Story 45. Former police officer here, but not as crazy as other posts. I was involved in an accident while in pursuit of a vehicle. I was T-boned on the passenger side of my patrol car. It was bad. My car did multiple 360s, jumped the highway median, and finally landed right side up. Every airbag went off. I must have blacked out due to the impact. When I woke up, there was blood on the airbags and all over my uniform. I knew I had to call dispatch, but due to concussion, I wasn't making any sense. All dispatch heard was that I was in an accident, and I think I started mumbling nonsense. With the radio crackling, I heard my dispatcher yell for all units to my location. Cars all had GPS units. The car door was stuck, and I thought I was never getting out. Thanks to an off-duty firefighter and plenty of other good Samaritans who saw what happened, they were able to pry the door off its hinges. And I swear to you, at that exact moment, at least 20 other officers from many different towns came to my rescue. It was a humbling experience that I will never forget. After being banged up pretty bad, I can imagine that getting that kind of response would feel good. A lot of people showed that they care about you and your safety. And hey, that's just a pretty nice and very human and humbling experience, as OP said. I can definitely understand the all units call from dispatch after hearing you just mumble over the mic about an accident. Not a great sign. Anyway, that is the last story for today. So if you made it this far, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.